He didn't scream. He didn't beg. He just clutched his chest, eyes wide and mouth trembling, as the color drained from his face. A teenage girl rushed to him, dropping her backpack, hands shaking but steady enough to keep him breathing. No one else moved. No one else knew. Not yet. That the man she was trying to save, on a turbulent flight between two continents, was the very man who had once abandoned her mother and had never once claimed her as his own. The man who whispered, "I'm your father," with his final breath before the cabin lights flickered out. Naomi had always thought the air was thinner at 30,000 feet. But this time, it wasn't the altitude that stole her breath. It was the way the man beside her collapsed without warning. One moment, he was reading the newspaper, his silver hair catching the plane's overhead light like strands of frost. The next, he was crumpled over his tray, eyes darting wildly, lips turning blue. She didn't think. She just moved. Her fingers fumbled through the oxygen kit. Her voice cracked as she shouted for help. There was a kind of silence that only exists inside emergencies. It stretched between the gasps, between the beeps of the pulse monitor someone brought over, between the quiet instructions she whispered to herself. Naomi had never been trained for this, but her hands worked with memory of documentaries, of health class, of watching her stepfather care for injured animals on their farm. The man was heavy, sweating, eyes half-lidded with pain. And then he said it, barely audible, like it wasn't meant to be heard. "I'm your father." When the plane landed in New York, Naomi stepped onto the jet bridge with trembling legs and 1,000 questions circling her head. She wasn't supposed to be on that flight. She wasn't supposed to meet anyone. "Just a legal formality," her stepfather had said. "Sign a few papers, accept or decline a mysterious inheritance, and come back home." But nothing about this felt formal anymore. The man's face was still burned into her thoughts, his expression, the way he looked at her, like she reminded him of someone long gone. Back in the terminal, she called her stepfather, told him everything, well, almost everything. He listened in silence, then said gently, "You might not know who he is yet, but maybe it's time he knows who you've become." Naomi didn't answer right away. She looked out the glass at the city she'd never intended to see, feeling both bigger and smaller than she ever had. She wondered how a stranger's heartbeat could now echo louder than her own thoughts. The terminal bustled around her, but every voice sounded muffled, like she'd slipped underwater. Everyone else had destinations. She had questions. Not just about him, but about her. What did it mean to save someone who had once chosen to leave? And why did it feel like something inside her had been cracked open? Something that couldn't be closed back. There were stories that began with truth, others with lies. But hers had just started with a heartbeat and a sentence she never saw coming. The wind always hit different out here. On the edge of a quiet town, where the land was more sky than soil, Naomi grew up chasing chickens barefoot and drinking lemonade from mason jars that smelled faintly of hay. Her stepfather, Caleb, was a man of few words, but infinite steadiness. He built fences, mended roofs, and never once raised his voice, not even when the cows trampled his vegetables or Naomi dented his truck trying to learn how to park. He wasn't blood. But somehow, he was everything that word meant. Naomi had always known she didn't come from him. Not really. Her mother had whispered pieces of that truth between lullabies and coughs. But it never mattered. Caleb was the one who taught her to ride a bike, the one who stayed through every storm. And when her mother passed away, he didn't just keep her, he kept loving her like nothing had changed. But now, everything had. The envelope came by registered mail. Thick, cream-colored, with a gold insignia that felt expensive, even before she touched it. Caleb looked at it like it might explode. Naomi just stared at her name on the front, written in a hand too perfect to be real. Inside, a formal letter. A summons, a plane ticket, an inheritance. Or so it said. From someone named Victor Langford. She had never heard the name. But Caleb had. His jaw tightened when he saw it, and for a moment Naomi thought he might tear the whole thing in half. Instead, he folded it slowly, placed it on the table and said, "If you want answers, this is where they'll be." Naomi didn't ask how he knew. She didn't press. Some truths feel like knives you aren't ready to hold, so she packed a bag, kissed his forehead, and boarded a plane without knowing who or what was waiting on the other side. The office smelled like leather and dusted marble, the kind of sterile wealth that made Naomi feel like her boots were too loud on the polished floor. The receptionist didn't smile, the elevator didn't make a sound, and the lawyer who greeted her looked like he'd been trained not to blink too often. He offered her water, which she declined, and motioned toward a long table with too many chairs for a meeting with just one girl. At the center sat a single folder, cream-colored, embossed with a crest she didn't recognize. "We appreciate your timely arrival," he began, flipping through the file. "Mr. Langford's health has deteriorated significantly. He wanted to ensure all affairs were in order before anything irreversible occurred." Naomi crossed her arms. "And what does that have to do with me?" The lawyer hesitated. "Mr. Langford named you as his sole heir." She blinked. "He what?" He slid the folder toward her. Inside, documents. Deeds. A letter with her name written in that same too perfect hand. And a photo. Her mother, younger, smiling. Standing beside a man with silver hair and tired eyes. It was him, the man from the plane. Victor Langford. Her voice trembled. "Is this some kind of joke?" The lawyer didn't smile. "Mr. Langford insisted it was time you knew the truth." Naomi stood. The chair screeched against the floor. She didn't take the file, didn't ask about the fortune. She just walked out, heart pounding, mouth dry, and the kind of betrayal that doesn't come from lies, but from silence. The estate sat like a monument to silence. Tall gates, ivy-covered stone, windows too clean to trust. Naomi stood at the front door for longer than she'd admit, heart thudding against her ribs like a warning. She half hoped no one would answer. But the butler, yes, an actual butler, appeared with ghost-like timing and ushered her inside. No questions, no small talk. Just long hallways and soft carpets that seemed too quiet for confrontation. Victor waited in a room that felt more like a museum than a living space. Paintings hung on every wall, none of them smiling. He was seated in a high-backed chair, a blanket over his knees, and eyes that looked older than his body. He didn't rise when she entered. Didn't pretend he had the right. "You look like her," he said. "Your mother." Naomi stayed near the door. "You waited until she was dead to reach out." His face didn't flinch, but something behind his eyes flickered. "I wanted to. I followed her. I helped, from a distance." "You mean you paid someone off and disappeared?" He looked down. "I was a coward. I was afraid of what my family would say, of what the world would think. I told myself I was protecting her." "But I was protecting myself." She stepped closer, the ache in her chest twisting sharp. "She died broke, working 3 jobs. And the man who could have changed that just watched." "I know," he whispered, "and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." Naomi looked at him, really looked, and for a moment she didn't see power. She saw a man alone in a mansion too big for redemption. "I don't want your money," she said. "I don't blame you," he replied. But before she could turn, he added, "It's not about money anymore. It's about truth. And time. And maybe giving you something that should have always been yours. A choice." She didn't answer. Just left him there, still sitting, still watching, as she walked back down the hall toward a world that felt no clearer than before. As she walked down the grand hallway, her footsteps sounded like hammers on guilt. She wanted to hate him, wanted to hold on to the anger like a shield, but something in his voice, raw, uncertain, clung to her. She didn't forgive, but she didn't feel finished either. Outside, the wind was sharp, biting against her face. She welcomed it. It reminded her she was still herself, still free, still in control of which way this story turned. Back home, the sky felt heavier. Naomi hadn't realized how much tension she'd been carrying until she saw the rust-colored fields again, the crooked fence line her stepfather always meant to fix, the barn door that whined like an old dog when the wind hit it right. She dropped her bag in the dirt, hugged Caleb like it was the only thing keeping her upright, and said nothing about what had been said. She didn't need to. He knew. But something was off. The next morning, Caleb didn't whistle while cooking breakfast. He kept checking his phone, kept pausing mid-step, like he'd forgotten what he meant to do. At first, Naomi thought it was the weather. The bills. The stress she'd brought home like dirt on her boots. Until she saw the letter. It was tucked inside the junk drawer, half covered by coupons and a broken flashlight, but she recognized the crest immediately, Langford. She opened it slowly. The words were formal, legal. Cold. Due to unpaid liens, the farm, her home, was being repossessed. She stormed out to find Caleb tightening fence wire. "You knew," she said. He nodded. "I didn't want to tell you until after your trip." Naomi's throat tightened. "How long have you known?" "Few months. I was trying to find another way." She held up the letter. "This isn't a surprise. This is sabotage." He didn't deny it. "Victor?" she asked. He looked away. Naomi's hands shook. "He said he wasn't trying to buy me, but now he's buying everything around me. He hasn't touched the land. That's old debt. Years of trying to stay afloat. But now," she said, "he knows we're drowning." The sun hadn't risen yet when Caleb left for work. Naomi had offered to drive him. He'd taken on a second job at a local machine shop to help make up for the loan error. But he waved her off like always, saying, "A little sweat never scared me." He kissed the top of her head, handed her the last pancake on the plate, and walked out the door with that same quiet strength he always carried. She watched the truck disappear into the mist, unaware it was the last time she'd see him standing tall for a long while. By noon, the call came. An accident at the site. Equipment failure, emergency surgery. Naomi didn't remember the drive to the hospital. Just the feeling of her chest caving in, like someone had reached in and twisted everything that kept her upright. She wasn't allowed into the ICU right away. Too much paperwork. Too many signatures. And just when she thought she'd collapse in that sterile hallway, a nurse came running. "He's stable," she said. "But the cost..." Naomi didn't let her finish. "How much?" The number hit her like a slap. It wasn't just high. It was impossible. Especially now. She sat in the plastic chair outside the surgery wing and cried quietly. Not because she didn't have options, but because she knew exactly who would show up next, and what it would cost. She didn't call him, but he came anyway. It was just after dusk when Victor appeared at the hospital. No entourage, no tailored suit, just a dark coat and the kind of presence that made the hallway grow quieter around him. Naomi saw him before he saw her, standing near the vending machine, staring at nothing, like he'd rehearsed this moment 100 times and still didn't know what to say. She didn't speak. She just watched him notice her. His posture straightened. His eyes softened. And for the first time, he didn't look like a man with answers. He looked like someone desperate for permission. "I didn't do this," he said, voice low, almost breaking. "I would never hurt him." Naomi didn't flinch. But you let it happen? He nodded slowly. Because I waited too long. The silence between them stretched like a tightrope. I can fix it, he said. I'll cover every expense, move him to a better facility, give him round-the-clock care. Just say the word. Naomi's eyes didn't blink. And what do I give you in return? He hesitated. Nothing. Just maybe a chance to be there, in some small way. She stepped closer, voice calm but sharp. You left my mother. You ignored me. And now that I'm all that's left, you want redemption at a discount? Victor didn't argue. He didn't plead. He just whispered, You saved my life on that plane. Let me try to save his. Naomi shook her head. If I let you save him, it won't be because you deserve it. It'll be because he does. Victor didn't follow her. For the first time in a long time, he simply stood still, alone in a hallway that no longer bowed to his name. The silence around him wasn't the silence of wealth or status. It was the kind that came when power had nothing left to offer. When he looked down at his hands, they didn't feel like hands that built empires. They felt old, empty, unwelcome. He left the hospital without saying another word. That night, Naomi stayed by Caleb's bedside, watching the machines breathe for him. She thought of her mother. Of those nights she'd cried quietly so Naomi wouldn't hear. Of the sacrifices no one ever acknowledged. And she made a decision. That night, she sat in the dark kitchen, phone in hand, eyes glued to the hospital's online bill summary. Caleb's name, the codes, the mounting debt. It didn't look like numbers. It looked like time she might not have. Time Caleb might not get without help. Her pride screamed no. Her love whispered yes. And somewhere between those two voices, Naomi saw her mother's tired eyes and Caleb's quiet sacrifice. Maybe it wasn't surrender. Maybe it was strategy. The next morning, she returned to the estate. Victor was surprised to see her. She didn't sit. I'll accept your help, she said, but on one condition. He waited. You will create a foundation, one that supports families like mine. Single parents, rural workers, people who get forgotten until they bleed. He nodded, quickly. And, she added, you don't put my name on it. Ever. Of course. And you stay away, unless invited. He looked like he might cry, but he just said, agreed. She turned to go, then paused. I still don't forgive you. He nodded again. I know. The knock on the screen door came just as Naomi was rinsing apples in the sink. It was light, tentative, not the kind of knock meant to demand entry, but to ask for it. She dried her hands slowly, her eyes already narrowing as she walked toward the porch. She knew who it was, even before she opened the door, before she saw the worn shoes on the step, the uncharacteristically plain jacket, the man standing with both hands folded like a boy about to apologize for a broken window. Victor didn't say anything right away. He just looked at her, really looked, and said, How is he? Naomi didn't move. Still recovering. I'd like to see him. Just once, if that's all right. She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped aside. Let him walk in. Watched him pass the photos on the wall, the ones without him, and pause at the door to Caleb's room. He stood in the doorway a long time before speaking. Thank you, he said softly, for being the father I never had the courage to be. Caleb didn't reply. He just looked at Naomi. She nodded. Victor walked in, sat beside the man who'd raised his daughter, and said nothing more. Caleb sat in a wooden chair on the porch, a blanket across his knees, steam curling from the chipped mug in his hands. His body still ached from the surgeries, but his eyes were steady, sharp, tracking every chicken in the yard like he was counting blessings instead of birds. Naomi sat beside him, shelling peas into a bowl, barefoot as ever. Neither of them spoke much anymore. They didn't have to. The quiet had grown familiar, like a well-worn coat. Down the gravel road, a cloud of dust signaled Victor's arrival. Not in a black sedan, not in a driver's car, but a rusted pickup borrowed from the foundation he now funded. He stepped out with a toolbox in one hand and a bag of feed in the other. Naomi didn't get up. She watched him cross the yard, watched how he didn't flinch when the rooster lunged, how he laughed softly when mud splashed up his pants. He wasn't trying to impress anyone, just to belong on their terms. He walked up to Caleb first. "Morning," he said. Caleb studied him for a long second, then gave a single nod. "You're late," Victor smiled. "By 20 years or 20 minutes. Both," Caleb said, but shifted over slightly in his chair. "Sit." They watched the sun rise over the fields. For a while there were no grand speeches, no apologies. Just the sound of boots on dirt, of a gate creaking in the wind, of someone hammering a fence post back into place. Inside, Naomi hung a framed photo on the wall. Her mother, young, strong, laughing in the sunlight. Next to it, she pinned a printed flyer from the Langford Fund for Rural Resilience, supporting single mothers, family farms, and forgotten places. She stepped back, looking at them side by side, then picked up her notebook and scribbled a few lines. Later, when Victor came inside to wash up, she handed it to him. "No strings," she said. "But if you mean what you say, read this. It's the first draft of a proposal. Community managed. Transparent oversight. Long-term impact." He took the pages like they were sacred. "You still don't want the estate?" She shook her head. "The world doesn't need another rich heir. It needs people who remember what struggle tastes like." Victor didn't argue. At sunset, they all sat down to a dinner of cornbread, beans, and fresh eggs. Nothing fancy, but somehow it felt like a feast. Months later, the foundation began its work, silently, steadily. A woman from Georgia wrote to say her small business was saved. A young father from Kansas sent photos of the rebuilt barn. Naomi read every letter, never responded, but kept them all in a box under her bed. She didn't need credit. She needed proof that something broken could still plant seeds. And one afternoon, as she handed a neighbor a box of donated tools, she finally smiled and said, "This came from somewhere that used to be pain." And when the fireflies came out, blinking like Morse code across the fields, Naomi leaned back in her chair and whispered, "You don't get to rewrite the past. But maybe you can help someone else write a better next chapter." Victor nodded, eyes glistening but proud. In the distance, the wind carried the faint sound of a tractor, a dog barking, a screen door slamming shut. Not an ending, just a life.